On episode 547 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Tony Riddle and discuss his book, Be More Human: How to Transform Your Lifestyle for Optimum Health, Happiness, and Vitality. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/547. If you decided you're ready to make a change, to reclaim your health and fitness, the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. Each week, we dive deep into health and fitness topics that affect those of us over 40. I'm Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with specializations in corrective exercise, behavior change, and fitness nutrition, a FAI certified functional aging specialist, and an OTA Level 2 online trainer. I'm joined each week by our co-host, Rachel Everett. She is an NASM certified personal trainer and a RRCA Level 1 run coach. Let us be your coaches as you find your way on your health and fitness journey, all right? Let's go. Getting older is more than just losing your hair or your skin getting thin and crepey. We get weaker, we gain weight. Our energy goes, and with it, we feel ourselves go. It's the aging curve. You look in the mirror or you see a reflection in a window and ask, who is that old dumpy? And you look away. There goes the confidence. Aches and pains seem to pop up like dandelions in your yard. If having an active retirement was part of the plan, well, what if I told you that you make this decision each and every day? You decide whether you're going down a steeper aging curve or you're slowing it. I think you know that. I think you are trying, but there's just something missing. With over 6.5 years of training people over 40, people just like you, I've learned that there are a few key things that trip us up. And I've made sure to address all of them in my BFFT program. The Be Fit for Task program, BFFT for short, is a 6-week deep dive that addresses mindset, nutrition, fitness, and self-care in a way that meets you where you are and takes you forward. We find the tactics and strategies that will work for you, giving you the tools you need. However, it's not good enough to know what to do. You have to do it and keep doing it. Consistency wins. And through BFFT, you have the accountability and support to get you there. Learn more at 40plusfitness.com/BFFT. Change is hard when you don't have the tools and accountability. BFFT will give you both, and you'll have me with you each and every step of the way. 40plusfitness.com/BFFT. Not deciding is deciding. You can stay on your current path or you can do something different. Check out 40plusfitness.com/BFFT now. You owe it to yourself to at least learn more about the Be Fit for Task program. I hope you will. Hey, Raz, how are things going?
Good, Alan. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. I recently finished my coursework for the Precision Nutrition Level 1.
Mm-hmm.
And waiting for my certificate to come in. I set it up. Well, I set up on monthly payments, so it's kind of one of those things where because it's not cheap, but they offered monthly payments. I'm like, okay, I'll do monthly payments. And considering how long it usually takes people to get through that course, they said, okay, expect it to take 3 or 4 months, and you have to get about that many payments in before they'll even let you say that you're certified.
Wow.
So I think I have to wait until the end of this month. It's already July. I have to wait till the end of this month, and I make a payment on the 29th. And so a couple of weeks from now, when this goes live, I'll get that payment in, and they should send me my certificate, and then I'll be Precision Nutrition Level 1 certified.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What did you think about the class? Did you learn anything interesting or anything?
I did. It's for a lot of people when they're thinking about this, they think about, I don't want to log everything I eat. And, it's so hard to track this, or, they want me to do away with this or do away with that. And precision nutrition is a lot more holistic. things I've said. So it kind of fits my model of thought is
Cool.
one, eat whole food.
Yeah, right.
Gee, who'd have thunk it? Eat whole food, and then just take some time to start understanding portion sizes.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And then it's sleep and making sure that you're staying hydrated. And those are the kind of the four core principles of it. And guess what you don't have to do when you understand portion sizes, you're getting adequate sleep, you're staying hydrated, and you're eating real food. You don't have to track calories. You don't have to really worry about tracking macros because guess what? You can't overeat whole food.
Oh, cool.
Think about it.
Yeah.
If I said, okay, here's what you got: chicken or beef or fish as a protein. And maybe you want to do vegan or vegetarian. It's like, so you get your protein together and you get your vegetables and fruits together and then try to overeat it.
Oh gosh.
Try. Just try to overeat meat. Okay.
No.
So I'll tell you, I'm really trying to cut a little bit more weight to get ready for the Tough Mudder, which is going to be in another month and a half from when this goes live. And so I've started like really trying to get myself into a ketosis and pushing through on that. And, right now I'm going through something where anything I eat that has carbs in it pops me down. And I'm like, so I'm right on that line. It's like, right over the line or right under the line. And I'm not, I wouldn't be too terribly troubled about it other than, I'm not cutting body fat right now because I drop out of ketosis when I eat any carbs at all. So I'm actually, at least for the last 48 hours, full carnivore.
Wow.
And I can tell you, it's like, so I had steak for breakfast. I had eggs for lunch. Well, I say breakfast. I ate it at like noon, but I had my breakfast at noon. It was steak. I had eggs for lunch, which was, I had about at 3:30. And then for dinner at about 6, I had another steak. So I'm talking about eating maybe about a pound of steak. So a big 16-ounce steak. And then 3 eggs was what I had for lunch. So kind of a light lunch. And then, and then another steak. So I ate about another pound of steak for dinner. And I couldn't eat anymore. If someone said, I got some leftover steak here. I'm like, well, I don't want to let it go to waste. So I'll wrap it up and save it for tomorrow. I could not have eaten any more than I ate. And if I added up the calories, I'm pretty sure I was really low on calories. I mean, because a pound of steak, I don't know, but 2 pounds of steak and 3 eggs, you guys can look it up and kind of figure out how many calories I had that day. But that's all I ate. And I stayed satiated and full all day long.
Oh, I would imagine. That sounds so filling. Wow.
Whereas I could eat a whole loaf of bread without even batting an eye. Like literally buy a whole loaf of French bread and just sit there and eat it. And then I'd be hungry 10 minutes later, or 2 hours later, I'd be starving. So, you look at the nutritional density of your food, and that's really kind of where the fundamental difference comes in. Whole food is nutritionally dense and you get full before that. Whereas a lot of other foods that are processed or even somewhat slightly mildly processed, they're just more calorie dense. And that's where the weight gain comes from.
Because they're just not satiating. They just don't fill you up.
So that's what this is. That's the kind of some of the core principles between precision nutrition. And there's a huge component of behavioral change. So there's a lot of what they're talking about is how we build habits, how we change behaviors. And so that's kind of the secret sauce to the precision nutrition process. Is it's not just telling you what to eat or not eat. It's basically saying beyond that, we have to build these habits. We have to build these things, and they don't just happen. You don't just decide. So there's a big behavioral component of making sure that happens. And then within it is like they break it down as like sometimes you're dealing with, elite athletes that want to really hit a physique target or something like that. So it gets very specific into some of the things that you would deal with someone who needs to lose a lot of weight versus someone who's really just trying to cut like another 3 pounds without losing any body fat, muscle mass and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that in there too, that's kind of what I would say outside of my core demo.
Sure.
Most of us are not trying to win physique contests.
No.
But
No.
that said, it's a really good certification. So anyone that is certified out there, I would look at precision nutrition as a way of understanding the nutrition aspects of personal training and then being able to offer that as a more holistic service.
That sounds awesome. Sounds like a great class.
So what's up there?
Good. Summertime brings some really fun stuff. Right now, we've got 2 massive mulberry trees on our property that are dropping mulberries like crazy. It's ridiculous. They're all over the ground, and my dogs love it. They get a free snack every time they go outside, but it also brings in other animals. And I just saw a red fox the other day. So the little fox family living somewhere in our wooded subdivision is coming to snack on the mulberries that are on our property. And it's been a real treat. So
now the thing about foxes, and this is, we see these cute, cuddly little pictures of foxes, and we see the pictures and we see the cartoons, and they seem like they're just this lovable little animals.
They're adorable.
They're adorable, but some of them are like really like not adorable. Like, so you could get a good fox or a bad fox, but they're dangerous. They're wild animals. And they could go after your dog. They could go after you. So yeah, you gotta mind your P's and Q's when you go out there. Okay.
Yeah. I keep an eye on my dogs when I do let them out. I'm always looking first before I let them out, just to make sure there's nobody in our yard. Fox, we've had deer run through. We've had groundhogs coming through as well. So we've got a whole fun menagerie of wildlife in our property. But
it's like Noah's Ark.
It is. It really is. Yeah, but it is always fun. It's fun to see.
Good,
so.
good. All right. Yep. Well, you ready to talk to Tony Riddle?
Sure.
Our guest today is a natural lifestyle coach, author, and record-breaking barefoot endurance athlete. One day, standing in his gym, his dream, he watched people training under fluorescent lights, and he came to an epiphany. This was not true fitness. He made a change to find the best way to train to be more human. With no further ado, here is Tony Riddle. Tony, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks, Owen. Great to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Now, your book is called Be More Human, which I love. How to Transform Your Lifestyle for Optimum Health, Happiness, and Vitality. And I think one of the reasons that this title, your title in this book, resonated so much with me is it's a lot of what I've done to improve my own health and fitness has included a lot of the things that are in this book, including we moved to a small island, Caribbean island, off the coast of Panama. And so while I do live in a town, I'm very, very close to the jungle, and I'm closer to nature and everything than I've ever been in my whole adult life.
Wow.
And so, it's like I can literally go out and be in places and not see a person walking for over an hour. And it's just
That's
kind of
a dream.
It is. It's special. It's special. I know. But a lot of this in the book doesn't require you to travel thousands of miles and move into the jungle to experience a lot of the benefits that I get being here. And so I want to talk a lot about this, what's in the book here, because I think this is a really special way to get healthier, connect with the earth, and really, and you say the term be more human, but I'm like, be who you're supposed to be. Be the person you were brought here to be.
Yeah. You're human, what the universe uniquely assigned you to be. Get into the understanding of that, what your own human potential is, or purpose, we could even call that. And I think we get so distracted from that in our everyday environments because we're simply not getting our needs met within those environments. And that's largely what the book is about. It's not about demonizing the urban environment or the lifestyles in the city or the city itself. It's trying to dismantle and deconstruct those ways of living that aren't serving us, and then reconnecting to ways of living that enable us to thrive in any environment. That's the point, to become the connected, empowered being that we entered it with. We're all innately wild, connected, empowered beings. It's what we land with. And over time, unfortunately, we get pulled off the path. But for me, it's about every day should still be able to get our needs met our most fundamental needs, that then enable us to thrive and really tune into, well, what's this human's potential here? How do I be more human?
And the way I like the way you put it in the book, because it really puts it in a really good context, is that we're effectively we create our own human zoo. And then you introduce the term rewilding, which you say a lot of people are going to initially kind of have a cringe moment when they think about, going back to the Stone Age, living in caves or maybe tents, with wood, stone tools. Can you go a little bit more into what this rewilding, getting out of our human zoo, is all about, and why it's so important?
Yeah, when I first started this kind of path, there was this language of zoo human versus wild human. And first of all, it's a bit of an insult to call someone a zoo human. And in the same breath, we can't really connect to being what a wild human is. And even indigenous cultures, they don't want to be perceived as being wild, right? It's like but again, looking at the indigenous template of what it is to be, there's some incredible kind of moments where I've had these deep insights in nature, because it's taken me to unplug myself from the urban environment to really tune in to how sophisticated it all is, right? And, if you look at indigenous cultures, how incredibly wise and understanding those cultures are to that landscape of which they're custodians, really. We could look at the the study I brought up in there is like 4 to 5% of the world's population is indigenous, and yet look after 80% of the world's biodiversity. So then it's like, well, what is it that we're doing then if that's 4 or 5%? And so firstly, there's the biodiversity, there's the question of that. What is it that we're doing within the environment? Is it because we're so separate from it? So I guess that's where I'd go with the wild understanding of it. That we are part of nature, not separate of it. We're interconnected in that sense. And then the zoo human in my mind is the fact that we've become disconnected and unplugged from it, and that we see ourselves separate. So there's the ego versus eco conversation. So a lot of the work for me is that disconnecting from an ecosystem and reconnecting to an ecosystem. Again, not by demonizing the urban environment or the environments of which we choose to live in. It's the habits, perhaps, that are in those environments. So we could be looking at movement, perhaps. What does movement look like in nature? Okay, so that would be a wild or organic way of moving versus what does it look like in the human zoo? What does it look like in our everyday urban setting? So we could even put movement down to, let's look at one study of the Hadza, for instance, to give us an example of cultures that have been living the same way for tens of thousands of years. The Hadza are just as sedentary as we are, as in they sit for 10 and a half hours a day. Yeah. As in we sit for 10 and a half hours a day. But there's something very different. Well, we have a chair, whereas their sitting practices are floor sitting. Therefore, there's multiple different rest positions we can be choosing on the ground, which ultimately will lead to one primary position, which is a squat. And that squat position, it enables me to recognize the same body weight on my feet in the base of support of my feet to which I would stand. So squatting is the same weight, same areas of the feet that I load for when I'm standing, but it's a rest position. And we see squatting as kind of an exercise protocol or strength conditioning protocol, but ultimately beneath it, there's a rest position that we can communicate, be around a fire, eat, poop, give birth in, right? And if we then look at the chair, perhaps in that conversation, or the sofa, where we may spend 10 and a half hours of our day committed to, in a way, it compromises or is the saboteur of the way that we stand. So suddenly we find ourselves locked in the hips or stagnation occurring in the hips. Then the pelvis and the lumbar become incredibly unstable because the hip joints aren't mobile enough. So the core element, the core we love talking about, becomes unstable. The mid-back becomes compromised. Our chest starts to collapse. Our head position starts to shoot forward. And all those postural changes aren't conducive with standing, And we spend a large portion of our day in that position. So that could just be, that could be a zoo posture versus a wild posture. And in terms of wild, I would say, what is it to be this wild, connected, empowered being? Well, it could just be just simply the way we move through a landscape or interact with it, how upright we are, how open we are. Is our posture connected? And are our joints working how they should be? Are our feet connected how they should be? Are they nourishing the behaviors of the ankle, the knee, the hip, stabilizing the lower back? We could then put sleep in that box because we all love the topic of sleep, right? And there's so many studies in what would be the human zoo or the human laboratory, even, because most of those studies are in the laboratory, which help us understand, well, we need 8 hours sleep a day, we must get 8 hours sleep a day. And to the point, people are stressed about getting 8 hours sleep a day because they've heard the news that if you don't receive 8 hours sleep, then you have a sleep debt, or you'll have a number of symptoms based on the fact you haven't accumulated your 8 hours. And they are diabetes, obesity, inflammation. And yet, when you look at these indigenous cultures, there's a great study in the book again. Professor Siegel from University in California, he looks at 3 different geographic locations of 3 independent tribes. So different geographic locations, independent tribes, the Hadza are in there again. And they all have the same time asleep. It's like 5.7 to 7.1 hours, no 8 hours at all, but no one is asleep for 8 hours or 5.7 to 7.1 hours in a solid state. It's this sleep wake cycle. And if you strip it back and think, well, that makes sense, right? Because in nature can be quite hostile. If it's been the same sleep or the same environment they've been inhabiting for tens of thousands of years, then that might have been hostile. If they were all asleep for 8 hours, in that time, would we be here today? Would those cultures be here today in those hostile environments if they went to the land of Nod for 8 hours? So in that sleep-wake cycle, what they're doing is they're waking, they're tending to fire because you have to have a fire. They're fixing tools. They're even known to smoke, party, whatever it is. But when they break away from the study and they look at the Hadza, for instance, and they assess for 220 hours, they study them, 33 members of that one tribe, 220 hours, they're only ever asleep for 18 minutes together. They're all doing this, all different sleep-wake cycles. So where is the obesity, the chronic inflammation, the obesity? It's not there. They're in incredible shape, And if some of the studies, when you look at them, because we have this idea about longevity, that they're only living until their 40s, some of these tribes know they can live beyond 70. That's not the case when we look at it. So it's quite an interesting model to unpack, just looking at, well, how does it look in nature and how does it look in the environments of which we're inhabiting? And then what is it that's different? So what is different in that sleep habitat, Alan? It's like lighting, right? There's no ding, turn the light on to create sunrise at sunset. So we know then that through the studies around melatonin and light pollution and blue light spectrums, they become the saboteur of melatonin, which is this incredible hormone that we only really associate with sleep, but it has antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory. It's also the main regulatory system of our digestive system around ghrelin and leptin, which then regulate whether I've had too much food, whether I need to eat, right? And then insulin, right? So there's this link to pancreas and the insulin. So then we have, inflammation, diabetes, and obesity, all in a conversation around melatonin and lighting all of a sudden. So is it the 8 hours sleep, or is it the environment of which we're choosing to sleep? So then my question is, well, how do we rewild that environment? And that's this context of rewilding a zoo or zoo environment. As simple as the bedroom, we could look at that one environment if we're looking to spend 8 hours in it. So what can we do? We could change the lighting. You can now bring in circadian lighting, which offers the same biological darkness, which is like starlight, moonlight, and firelight. So it brings in amber tones. And anything they suggest between 60 and 600 lux will inhibit blue spectrum light, will inhibit melatonin. Then what else is different? The temperature. There's also studies that suggest that if the temperature can also be a saboteur of melatonin, So it's about getting the temperature down in the evening. So if you think about being in an outdoor environment, if you've ever camped, you know that once the sun goes down, it gets cooler at night. So we know there's cooling down of temperature too. And then there's something else, which is the materials that perhaps we're breathing in and out in that environment. So in nature, again, it's an organic experience. So we're only ever really inhaling, or let's call it consuming, through everything: our ears, our nose, our senses, our taste, everything organic. So how do we make that expression more organic? And it's probably one of the points in the book. Everything else is free, really, the points I put in the book. But this is one where you stuff out of that bedroom environment to replace it with more organic material. That might be the bedding, or things like breathing. We can change breathing mechanics. So we now know that through nasal breathing, there's a change of relationship between parasympathetic and sympathetic. And then the information that we receive, right? So we all have one of these now. That's quite a bright
mobile
light
phone,
to be consuming.
Mobile phone.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic studies around just fields of vision. So that's quite bright. So that alone, the light will inhibit melatonin. It's a suppressor of that. We recognize that now, right? The saboteur of that. But also the fact that the visual state is so concentrated, and that's associated with more sympathetic, which is like fight and flight, whereas an open visual field is more associated with parasympathetic. So you have one condition where we're staring at a blue light, which will suppress melatonin. The second one, we end up with a really hypervisual state, which is sympathetic fight and flight before sleep. The next one is then dopamine, because we're typing and swiping, which again isn't conducive with sleep. And studies suggest that up to 400% melatonin from just typing and swiping. And then it can just be the information we're receiving. So is the information upregulating? Am I perhaps the difference between the fire and the indigenous tribes around the fire is perhaps romance, comedy, imparting wisdom, whereas this can be quite toxic. And we've even normalized social emotional bullying over social media, right? It's okay to drop this comment in that's incredibly abusive to one person that they might receive before sleep. Or it could be a movie you're watching, which is incredibly violent. That would be the equivalent of being around the fire with your tribe in this really down-regulated state and being invaded or something, right? Or in a moment, a predator comes in. So then you switch to what would be fight and flight, right? That would be a reaction to it. But we have that in our possession the whole time. So it's when you see it like that and you understand it like that, it's much easier to think, okay, I get it now. It's not really about the length of sleep. The length of sleep is almost symptom relief. It's a symptom. What is it? What's the cause? It could even be the bedroom of which you're sleeping in could be the cause of, the very conditions that are leading you to suppress melatonin, are leading to inflammatory disease, diabetes, and obesity. This is just simple factors like that.
Now,
and then we can address it with symptom relief, or we can look at the cause, and the cause we change the environment. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that's fascinating about you is you're an endurance runner and do your runs barefooted. And I can tell you, the other day it was raining, and I had wore because I was planning to meet my wife out, and I had wore my leather boat shoes, brand new leather boat shoes, and I didn't have an umbrella, and I was like, okay, I can't walk home in these. I'm going to have to walk home barefoot. And so I put them in a plastic bag, and I put them in another bag, and then I started walking home barefooted. And, one, stepping in a puddle when you can't see the bottom is a little kind of scary, but sharp rocks. I seem to be able to find every single sharp rock between 2 points. How does someone get into barefoot running and do it in a way where they're not hurting themselves? Like I said, I think you can condition your foot, but and obviously it'll get stronger. I know that because I spend a lot of time walking around barefoot, but it just, to me, running barefoot is a little scary.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mind aspect to it, right? As well as obviously the physiological, but there's also a technique, right? And I think we sometimes neglect the technique, but there's a study in the book from University of Liverpool, which is Chris Dort, and they looked at the strength side of it, so the physiological changes that can occur by people returning just back to barefoot footwear, like Vivo Barefoot, for instance. In this particular study, it was Vivo Barefoot. And within 6 months, they'd improved 60% foot strength and 40% balance just by returning that. So if we think of that being the foundation of your superstructure, So the first phase could be, well, you could change to more minimal footwear. That's one step, because then you're still getting the shape of the foot. Because ultimately you want to look at, well, what's the shape of a foot versus the shoes that I'm wearing. So if you were to take a piece of paper, draw around your foot on the paper, and you'd find the toe area, like the foot, this area is much, excuse my dirty feet there, is wide, and the heel is much more narrow, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you then grab your footwear and you draw around it, you might find that the toe box is actually much more narrow. It's aesthetic. So it's more aesthetically pleasing, but it's, again, the saboteur to how that foot is designed and to move and nourish the rest of your posture and the way that we move above it. So if the shape of the foot is compromised, there's 26 bones, 33 articulations, joint actions, like 100 muscle, tendon, ligaments, 29 muscles, and then it's made up of tendon, ligaments. And then there's 200,000 receptors, like the receptors, like the equivalent of your hands, that reside in a foot. I mean, it's phenomenal engineering. But that then feeds and nourishes how your joints and behaviors are above it to make you more efficient and minimize the risk of injury. But let's say Alan decides, I'm going to take my shoes off. I'm going to walk over a hard surface which has hard stones on it. If I was to ask you to jump up and down barefoot on a really hard surface, what gives, Alan? Is it you or is it the hard surface?
Well, I'm going to have to give, because it's not going anywhere.
Right? Not going anywhere. Or we'd be hitting hard on hard, and one of those surfaces will have to break, right? So what happens is that if you were to jump up and down on a compliant, really soft surface, we can become more stiff, right? And more rigid, because the surface is doing this. So come 1969, it was normalized all of a sudden to wear more rubber. And then we have more rubber, but we also have a narrow toe box. So we create a narrow shape for the toes to go into. Then we put rubber underneath it with a heel, which raises it and pushes the foot into the footbed even more. So we create a stiff, rigid foot, which becomes narrow in the toe box. And the whole point of that wide, super wide foot is not just the loading points, leverage, and pivoting. There's specific actions that have to occur in the foot that are based on leverage and balance, and this ability to even grip with the foot. When the foot becomes incredibly stiff and rigid in that shape, you're then, when you try and return back to walking over a stony path, you're then going back to that hitting hard on hard and stiff on stiff. And it can feel like, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, until you would have to learn how to break the foot up. So again, going back into, one way is to return back to minimalist barefoot footwear. So you can start to allow the foot to open up. It has minimal, but there's a minimum layer between you and the earth. It's zero drop. You'll feel stuff underneath you, but you won't be getting so much that ooh ah, which creates more tension. The more of that response, the more rigid and tense you get, adding to more hard on hard expression. And the other thing, what I've put some practices in the book, is to rewild the feet, which are practices like toga, we call it. It's like yoga for your feet. And that's then about opening the feet up and getting more expression into them, and ultimately softening them so they can become the compliance over the stiff surfaces. And then eventually, what happens, the more and more familiar, you normalize it. And what you find is that you become more sensory aware, more sensitive. And I don't mean sensitive in the I mean sensitive, like really learn. You'll learn how to become, again, soft when you need to be, stiff when you need to be. We have the most sophisticated suspension systems within us, right? That's the point. And that's why those 26 bones, 33 articulations, 200,000 receptors are there, and over 100 muscles, tendons, ligaments, 29 muscles and the rest tendon, ligaments that make that 100 up. That's why it's there. But it's there also because it feeds and nourishes all the other mechanics above it. So that's where I'd go with feet. But then you then have, the chair. So the chair will then, the seat is sitting for 10.5 hours, then compromises the posture above it. So it's like a two-pronged thing. Running for me is not just, barefoot running isn't just about feet. It's about getting the appropriate posture and becoming much more upright and aware of that posture. And the whole point there is that our head should be up above. Like we lead with the heart. The chest is the lead segment, not the head. the moment the head goes forward from typing, swiping, and couching and slouching, I call it, what would happen is when you're running, so that if your head's far forward of you, you have to have your foot further out in front of you. Otherwise, you'd simply fall over. You imagine you're upright like this and we're running along. The moment the head drifts forward, you'd have to put your foot further out. Otherwise, you'll fall over. So the head would get to a point, your tipping point. But if we can become much more upright, you can get to the point where your feet are pretty much landing underneath you. And it means there's a lot less contact time. So you just catch the ground beneath you. And the idea is that leading from your heart and keeping your head up, we're literally just falling in this direction. And you just keep pulling your feet softly from underneath you. And pulling is a great term. I understand that from a genius called Nicholas Romanoff, who developed the pose method. And this idea that we think we have to push when we run. And ultimately, if you just keep doing this, you just pull your feet from the ground. And the idea is by pulling, you're not driving your feet down or pushing. You're trying to pick them up. And I would pick them up with sensitivity again, like this softening. And you don't need to worry about putting them down. It will just happen naturally. Just pick up. So if you keep your head up, your chest up, lead with the heart. Nasal breathing also helps because, again, we have the study suggests that there's through nitric oxide that we inhale through the nose, it's stimulated, will benefit vasodilation and bronchial dilation, therefore become more efficient with our lungs of breathing, and we can lower our heart rate and our blood pressure just by nasal breathing. There's also 42% less vapor loss by nasal breathing, which is like mind-blowing, especially for me, for an endurance athlete. But it keeps us in that calm state again. So I think with breathing, we can be relaxed. With the right posture, we can deal with the forces appropriately. We're not creating longer levers or loading areas of the feet we're not designed to load. And just by either wearing minimal footwear or allowing the feet to understand what's beneath them. Again, it helps feed our movement brain to make the right calculations on what muscles, tendons, and actions should be applied for that one locomotive pattern. And I say that one because walking is the same. It's like walking with an upright posture, down-regulated through breath, less striding, actually trying to keep your feet underneath you, but thinking about rolling through the feet and becoming visually aware of the environment as well, because the moment we bring the head down, the head starts to chase and we create longer levers. Otherwise, again, we'd be falling over. And the less contact time, the more efficient again, because it requires less muscle action. You're on the ground for less time, basically. So there's a lot there to unpack, I would say. Yeah.
Now,
posture, relaxation, and the timings and the rhythms of that,
And the key takeaways I get from this, again, being over 40, actually over 50 now, is balance, because falls become a big deal, particularly as we get over 60. So anything you can do to improve your balance, which this will do, is good. And as you mentioned, the being more efficient means you're going to be capable of going faster and doing more work. So when you're out training, you're going to get more done and you're going to improve. You're going to see better improvements because your efficiency and your capacity to do more, because your heart rate isn't racing as high because you're not in that fight or flight state. So there's a lot to unpack there that makes this really interesting. Now, the other thing, and people won't know this listening to a podcast, but you're sitting on the floor. And so sitting on the floor, it's one of the things, if you hand a kid a book or a toy, immediately they're going to run over and they're going to sit on the floor. And then somewhere along their lives, probably around grade school age, we start beating that out of them. And then eventually they're going to be on couches and chairs, just like the rest of us. I found that sitting on the floor when you're with a kid it changes the whole relationship with that child. And I've built relationships with my granddaughter. Initially, she was terrified of me. And I built a relationship by walking over and sitting on the floor and starting a SpongeBob cartoon on my computer. And she came over and sat next to me and we watched SpongeBob for about an hour. And my ability to be able to sit on the floor for that amount of time, I shifted, I moved. I didn't, you can't really just sit. You got different postures you have to do because your body's just naturally going to tell you to do that, which is actually part of the value. Can you, in there, you had actually I think 6 different ways of sitting that you want to shift between. And I think actually, in my opinion, that a lot of those just naturally happen. But can you talk about sitting and having a floor sitting and having a floor sitting practice?
Yeah, we've been a ground living floor sitting family for, I think, since Lola and Millie, they're our eldest, so they're at 13 and 12 to about turn 13 and 10. So 10, I'd say, yeah, it's around about 9 years, I guess now, 8 or 9 years. I used to have a Pilates studio and big practice, like 6 practitioners, and people would rock up at the studio. They'd take their compromising narrow toe box compliance shoes off, put them in the rack, and they would have no doubt been driving to the Pilates studio, sitting, would then come in and jump on the reformers and the Cadillacs and try and dismantle all the harm that was being caused, the symptom relief from the environments, the cause, which was the footwear and the chair, because they'd been sitting for 10.5 hours. Right? So I had this kind of eureka moments would pop off. It's like, wow, okay, this is like, so what does that look like again? And it came really through the barefoot running and understanding that, well, there's a natural running posture. Where do we see that? Well, indigenous cultures again, natural running posture. It can be seen there. And again, these incredible tribes are running the same. They all look the same when they're running and have the same posture. And so what's different? Again, ground, there's no footwear and there's no chair involved. That's how they've managed to maintain the same posture. So what do the sitting postures look like? Well, it works out. You can strip it back, and you may see this as you've alluded to with kids. You see them sitting on the ground. You'll see them transition from one shape to another. And those rest positions that are in the book, there's 6 different series. It's a series of each. So there's a squatting series, a side sitting series, a long sitting series, and so on, a kneeling series. Each one of those rest positions is like a prerequisite of, or will complement the way we stand, because that's ultimately what we used as a baby to toddler to young adult to stand up, right? And then what happened is at some stage a chair was pushed underneath us, and then we start to sit in a chair for longer periods of time in a classroom environment with a hierarchical system with a teacher at the front, and we're told to sit still and be quiet. And we may have had an hour then to go out and play, and then that hour became lunch break, and then play became PE, right, physical education, which then involved stretching and doing all that stuff. But before the chair, kids, you don't see any toddlers stretching. They're just incredibly fluid in this ability to move on the ground. And what we've noticed through ground sitting and being a floor sitting family is our kids, that's how they've remained, right? We unschool as well. There's no school in that conversation. So the only time we're sitting, it's unavoidable. It could be in a car or a plane or a train or occasional cinema, right? But other than that, it's ground sitting, and their postures are incredible, right? Their framework's incredible. Their athleticism has remained incredible. They haven't had to relearn how to once they stand up from a chair. So again, I think it's understanding that there's beneath our upright, wild, empowered posture, there are these sitting postures, and those sitting postures help nourish that upright posture.
I love that. I love that concept of a sitting family. And the reason is that I think back to how much money I have spent on couches and chairs over the course of my life.
Right. And we use bolsters and stuff like that, because you still want to create like a dining experience. So our dining room table is a low table, and we have ground sitting, like little bolsters, like yoga cushions and stuff like that on the ground. So that if people come, they still have some experience as a dining experience.
Yeah.
Now that's not going to work for everyone. So my advice is always that, look at the everyday environment. Can I spend less time on the couch? Can I set a timer and maybe kneel or squat? And you do get signals. And for some at the beginning, it will be uncomfortable, but it's playing with the edges of that discomfort until some of those postures become a little more comfortable. They won't become so comfortable that you'll spend 10.5 hours like you could in a chair, because nature's way is you'll get signals to tell you to move. And the beauty of that is there's a chemical metabolic cost for movement. Taking your everyday work, if you work from home, put your laptop down. Like I'm on this call, I'm on the ground. I've been side sitting, I've been sitting cross-legged, I've been kneeling, and I've been squatting already, all on a call. And we're like 40 minutes in. I just have, whilst having a conversation, 40 minutes of mobility and strength work that ultimately is going to help me remain mobile in my hips and strong in my core, keep my head and chest upright, which then has an overlap into the way that I stand, I walk, and I run. As a 47-year-old endurance athlete, is that important? 100%. And we're all endurance athletes. That's the point, you know. Underneath it, we are, right? That's where we're at. And it's just, unfortunately, some of the habits within habitats aren't enabling that. And if you want to become, again, more efficient, minimize the risk of injury, then get on the ground and just get back into understanding how those behaviors are on the ground and how that will then feed into how your posture will thrive. And there's a guy, Yehudi, in my book. I mentioned him. He's like 82 now. And he first come wanting to learn how to walk. And he had this stooped posture from working, and collapsed in the chest and stiff in the hips and stiff in the ankles. And then over time went through toga, rewilding feet, rewilding footwear, Vivo Barefoot, got him on the ground sitting. And then later on in time, the reason that it turned out he wanted to learn how to walk was because he wanted to climb Everest base camp with his wife for his 50th anniversary. But his commute now looks like this. Right? He walks to the tube in barefoot footwear. The tube is our underground train, right? He then gets on the underground, and mostly people will go, do you want a seat? Because he's like 80, right? And he went, no, I'm okay. And so he'll either hang off the bars above, so he'll hang onto the rails above while the train is moving. So he gets grip strength in, it opens his chest up, enables his whole respiratory system by enabling that upper posture through hanging. And then when the train stops, he'll either squat whilst people get on. When the train goes again, the doors close, he'll surf. So he's now balancing whilst not holding on to anything and surfing the train. And that just, again, it proves that it's never too late even, Alan, you know, because sometimes we look at this, we go, oh, no, I'm past that. I'm never going to be able to sit back on the ground again. Here we are, a dude in his like 80s. That's what he's doing. And that's his practice. And he also works from home, and he has a standing desk, and he also has a sitting desk. But he also has a lot of his practice on the ground that will help dismantle and deconstruct some of the poor qualities that come from sitting in a chair, but also enhance the way that he stands at his standing desk, and will improve the posture of which he chooses to stand. Because standing desks get a lot of praise, but if I'm not posturally aware and I still have inefficiencies in movement within the ankle and the hip, and I'm not flexible or upright in the mid-back, which comes through sitting in a chair, then that's just as detrimental to stand with poor posture as it is sitting with it, you know? So that's.
Now, one of the other areas of movement that I want to get into, because I think this is another area where we kind of move from child to adult, and we start casting away the things that we did. You know, there was that quote, when I was a child, I played as a child, and, you know, play. You know, as adults, we you know, okay, I play tennis, or, you know, I maybe play basketball. But as you got in the book, I started thinking, because you said this, is like those sports that we play, they're usually unilateral, or they're front and back, or there's some aspect to them where it's repetitive movement that we're doing. And while it's movement, which is great, I'm never going to poo-poo movement at all, it's not really building us to be a better human. Can you talk about how we should play, how play would be if we got out of our zoo?
Yeah, it's very specialized, the way that we observe those sports, right? They're very specialist, and underneath it all, we're all generalist movers. So again, in the book, I've put a study by Peter Gray. He wrote a fantastic book, Free to Learn, and we're an unschooling family, so it's around homeschooling and unschooling. But within it, again, 3 independent tribes, 3 different geographic locations, and he asked 10 leading anthropologists, what does childhood look like in nature? And firstly, their response is they're the most well-adjusted, well-rounded individuals they've ever met, you know, which we, through our colonial minds, like savages or whatever comes through, the most well-rounded, well-adjusted. And that's, you know, not from a lens of cultural appropriation, it's cultural appreciation. It's like, wow, okay, what's different, you know? And children are playing from infancy through to their teenage years, and they are left to play without adult intervention, without the adult supervision, right? So it's from infancy through to teenage years. So all different ages playing and mixing together. And they play at being everything. So they've played at being the plants, the rocks, the animals. Yeah. They've played at being the adults, foraging, hunting, tracking, fire building, shelter building. It's all in there. So that the idea is that they walk into adulthood in still what would be a playful state of mind. And in adulthood, we could then question, well, are those tribes that we're talking about operating with a playful state of mind? And when asking Bruce Parry, who I interview, and he's again mentioned in the book, and from what's said is that this Penan tribe that he spent some time with, and the Benjeli tribes, is that these tribes are moving through a landscape in this meditative state, in a real parasympathetic state. What we call like flow states, they're in it. And flow state I refer to as just being play state. It's just an extension of that. And then that ability to move your physicality in that environment, because if you're playing at being everything, you are everything. You'll be the animals within that environment, right? We have this amazing ability to impersonate any animal, right? Yet we have difficulty even moving with our own locomotive patterns. And there is this understanding, well, how does it compare through childhood to what it would look like in nature? And so we enter a school system where we're very playful, and we have play as the background within that, where we're moving around on a playground, and we're expressing, but it's still supervised by adults. And there's now fear involved with that children might fall off something or hurt something. So we then start to worry about perhaps being sued. So then we change even how high kids can climb and practice climbing or jumping or balancing. And these are the fundamentals, like balance, climbing, jumping, lifting, throwing, defending, running, swimming, right? They're our generalist movements. And even imagine the amazing skills of foraging, where you're down on the ground and low gait walking and grabbing things, or have to perhaps crawl under something or over something, or balance up in something, or climb something. That's a generalist mover, and kids have that. If you actually let your kids just thrive in an environment, you'll be amazed at their capacity to move. But yet we go into a classroom environment where that's stripped back and we're told to sit. We then get into a PE, physical education, that's very specialist, and the specialist lens means that it doesn't often suit every child. We also have the massive age differences. So the eldest in the year versus the youngest in the year, who's going to be picked, who's going to be strongest, and who's going to come away feeling inadequate? The youngest kids. The bigger kids are much stronger, they're taller, they're picked by whoever's in charge of that class. Then we have things like footwear again, like the basketball studies, like basketball footwear. Think of the forces that are involved in basketball. It's very playful basketball. It's a really great practice. It would become even greater if we looked at foot function, because those basketball boots we're talking about, again, incredibly narrow in the toe box. The performance and behavior of the feet is compromised. That means the knee has to be the lower back. So if we then brought in that Professor Chris Dort study and said, well, what if we didn't put compromising footwear on those children to begin with, and they maintain 60% of that foot strength and their balance? What potential would be there? Or we could say, what potential has been lost by wearing compromising footwear over time, and then putting specialist sports through these young bodies that are, again, as you suggest, right? It's in the book. It's this understanding that they're very linear, those practices, like pushing, pulling, one plane. Whereas actually, when you look at play, it's multi-direction. And there's something else phenomenal that I observe through it, and observing my kids, is through that tribal experience of the kids are being everything. It means that you can step outside your experience. So even if you get stuck, like we get stuck, right? People get stuck in depression, or it could be mental health, for instance. But if you don't lose your playful state of mind, you can imagine yourself in a different position. You can play out being something else. So whereas in nature it might be, I don't know, whatever we're playing out in the in a natural experience versus what we might be playing out in the human zoo might be Harry Potter, Dobby, or all these characters. At least there's an opportunity to imagine yourself outside of that. So there's other things that empathy, compassion that can be delivered through that. I had a big workshop. It was with a yoga community, and it's called Yoga Connects. And I was asked to take a class and at the festival, and there was a large number of yogis came in. And I said, look, firstly, we're going to just roll your mats up, put them away, take your footwear off, and we will just come into the space, and we walk around the space and meander around the space. And I said, well, I'm not going to teach you yoga. I'm not a yogi, but I'm going to teach you something about connection, and it's going to come through play. And all of a sudden I had these yogis in the room brushing shoulders and then bouncing off one another, the next body part, next body part, then mirroring one another's movements, then dancing head to head, looking into one another's eyes, and then mimicking each other as if they're working in a mirror. And suddenly what can become, even in yoga, which is these same planes on one mat performing the same movements over and over religiously, suddenly the expression changed, right? This amazing vocabulary of movement started to unravel in a very short window of time, because it's like play hydration, we call it. It's like you can suddenly start to reconnect with something we've become quite divorced from.
Tony, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
So that trifecta for me is breath work, looking at different modalities of breath that help me change my state of mind, my being, my very being. And that might be from nasal breathing to tempos of breath. Simple practice on the hour, every hour could be simply 4 seconds up through the nose, 6 seconds out. I call it a rebooting breath, so that the day doesn't get away or the experience doesn't get away with me. I can stay in check and I can keep bringing it back to the breath. It's incredibly powerful. It drops us into a more restful state and just enables us to stay more in presence and be present in the moment. The other one, of course, is nature immersion. The study suggests just 20 minutes in a natural setting. It could even be the park, really, but the more natural or more biodiverse, the better the emotional state would be, I would suggest. Just 20 minutes is enough to lower heart rate, blood pressure. And the more diverse, like forest, you start to get things like phytoncides, which are the compounds that plants, like terpenes, are almost like aromatherapy that's given off by plants. And they're antifungal and antibacterial. And when we inhale that, our body starts to produce natural killer cells, which help then fight things like viruses and even tumors, right? So we have lowering heart rate, blood pressure, and an amazing kind of ability to improve our immune system just by being in nature. So that's breath work, I would say, nature immersion, and then movement. Just finding those opportunities, become more of an opportunist. Go back into that playful state of mind of how you might move. Get out of the chair, get onto the ground, start moving around. Think of that as a mobility practice. If you work from home, you have an amazing opportunity to move more within that environment. Just we're so conditioned to think we have to sit and do the work. And that might also mean on the commute, can I run down the stairs instead of getting the lift or the escalator? Can I balance on curbstones or something? Just think of that. And along with nature immersion, we could say that nature immersion also involves cold immersion, like cold water therapy and getting into cold water. And that also has an ability to completely change our perception, alter our state of mind. In 2 minutes, you're done, and you can literally maybe not be like the person getting in the water, but you'll be in love with the person getting out. It can really change things in a very short window of time. So they're my 3, really. I call it Tony's trifecta. It's
Tony's
nature,
trifecta.
Breathwork, nature immersion.
Love that.
Nature
Love
immersion and natural movement.
All right. Well, Tony, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about the book, Be More Human, where would you like for them to go?
You can hit my website, which is www.tonyriddle.com. I'm also known on Instagram as @thenatурallifestylist, and there's lots on there. So in the link, the bio there, you'll be able to find links to my book, up and coming workshops, upcoming retreats and experiences. I have a big retreat going in August, end of August, which is a Rewilding retreat. So it's on an incredible estate. So it's an opportunity not just rewild movement, but also be involved in the landscape there and have that experience. So that Tony trifecta is in full effect there. It's a great space for that. And also have a look out for the 100 Human Experience, which is it's a weekend events that I hold with 100 people. We have 100 people come, and there's breath work, movement, cold immersion ice baths, ecstatic dance, cacao ceremonies. It's like a really just an incredible experience. So all of that can be found really on either on the website or on my Instagram account. They're good places to head, really. There's a number of tutorials there. And if you're interested in the barefoot stuff, there's a documentary we just won Best Documentary for at the British Independent Film Festival. It's called One Man, 2 Feet, 3 Peaks, and that's up on YouTube. There's some great stuff there. That's a record that I broke running the 3 biggest peaks, the highest peaks in the UK. And normally the idea is you drive between them. I decided to run the whole distance, and I covered the mountains barefoot as well. So it was breaking a men's running record, but also breaking it being barefoot, which is quite something.
It is. Thank you, Tony. I'll make sure to have those links on the show notes for this episode. So, Tony, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness. Welcome back, Raz.
Hey, Alan. That was a really interesting interview, and I really like the term rewilding. Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm a big fan of his wild human or zoo human.
I actually think I like that. I actually think that is, well, because we don't want our kids to get dirty. They stick their hands in the dirt and we want to wipe it off. We don't want to get dirty. A lot of us don't. We want clean, we want sanitary. We're concerned about all this stuff. Hand sanitizer, avoiding everything, concrete this, rubber that, gloves, masks, all of it. We do so much to separate ourselves from our environment. Sunglasses, just even something as simple as sunglasses is separating you from the sun. And so, I get it. If you're walking on Pensacola Beach, it's so bright white with the sun.
Yes.
You're going to be blind. You're going to be blind. You're going to be blind for 20 minutes until your eyes adjust. I get it. But we do so much to separate ourselves from our environment. And that's frankly unnatural.
Well, that's why I like the term rewilding, so that we do take an extra step into nature, which I love. I'm always outside running on the trails and checking out what is all out there. But the other part of the conversation was, you've said this in the past too. We look at our ancestors, hunter-gatherers. They were active. They weren't lounging on sofas and lazy boys like we are today. But also you brought in the child aspect of it, looking at what our children are doing. They're just running around playing without even thinking about whether their watch is saying they're productive or not. Yeah. They're just out there enjoying what they're doing.
Right. And, the whole time we were on the conversation, Tony was basically sitting on the floor. He had a lower desk. And so I could tell, he was sitting on the floor. He was kneeling. He would move his leg. He would shift side to side as he was talking. You can't tell that's happening when you're listening to it.
No.
But the whole time he was sitting on the floor. And as a result, of our interview, which I think ran almost an hour, he was moving. And, that's positive movement. But all that said, we don't get down enough. And we don't get up and we don't get down. We're in chairs, we're in couches. We spend our office hours in a desk. We might be lucky enough to have an adjustable desk or something like that where we can at least stand part of the day. And that's better. That's better. And better's good. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. But it was interesting. I didn't even think about having a seat, like sitting on the floor type desk. Like you just said, he was doing in his interview. We don't get down on the floor very often unless we drop something and have to kneel down to find it.
and
and
grunt.
it's an important
And grunt
movement.
and grunt and then the worst of it is like, you have the people that joke about, well, I don't get on the floor anymore unless I have a plan on how to get up.
Right? It's true.
And we can joke about it, but the reality is that's functional movement. And let's say you wanted to go camping. Well, what are you doing? You're squatting, you're getting down, you're starting a fire because you can't start a fire standing up. You're getting in and out of your tent, which unless you are kind of really doing something special, you don't walk into your tent. You get on your hands and knees and you
hands
crawl.
And knees,
if you're sleeping, you're not sleeping on a pillow top bed. You now have at best a blow up, but a lot of times not. The best you could do is make sure you don't have a rock or a root under your lower back. Find a soft spot, right spot to lay. And then you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. You're crawling back out of the tent and up and walking around. And so, it's just these things that we say, okay, I would love to be able to do this. I'd love to be able to do that. I want to be able to carry my own kayak. I want to be able to go camping and enjoy myself. There's movement patterns that you're going to be doing that you should make a part of your regular life. So when you're camping, this is not an unusual thing. This is a part of your lifestyle. It's the way you intended to live when you go camping, when you do these other things. So, if you're on the floor and you're sitting for an extended period of time doing something, it could be watching a television show, you're sitting there and your watch is not going to tell you, oh, you moved this many squirms in that many ways. And your watch isn't going to do that. There's no metric for it other than you notice that it just gets more natural. It feels better. There's not these grunts and groans or pains or aches. You're building mobility from the very fact that you're on the floor and your body is forcing you to squirm around because you can't just sit. You're going to want to move, your leg to the side. You're going to want to shift the other leg. You're going to go move from one butt cheek to the other butt cheek. And then maybe you want to go ahead and get up into a kneeling position. And while you're in the kneeling position, instead of both knees on the ground, you want one knee on the ground. And then, you're just moving around through these ranges of motion. And that's one of the things he has in the book is he literally has those laid out of, okay, this is a set, this is a set, this is a set.
Nice.
And so you can say, I'm going to spend some time in a kneeling position. I'm going to spend some time in a sitting position. I'm going to spend some time in a squatting position because if you get your mobility right, the squat, as he mentioned, is a rest position. I know that sounds really weird, but without having your butt sitting on something other than maybe your heels, that should be a resting position. But we've kind of beat that out of ourselves with decades of sitting. We're not able to do that. And you can look at videos and see if you've ever been to particularly Asia, but mostly across Asia and somewhat in Africa, I've seen this where literally, they squat down almost butt to grass, and that's a resting position. They're just sitting there. Now, they're also, most of the time when I see them doing that, they're smoking.
Oh, gosh.
But which we'll talk about in a few weeks with Dr. Ramirez. But, that's the whole point is, though, that's their resting position. So instead of just standing around or sitting in a chair, they just plop down and they're in a very comfortable rest position because the joints are now, all the pressure's off the muscles and the joints. You're just in a natural sit there position. There's a lot of little things we can do. And this book has some really good guidelines of how you can get started rewilding yourself. But to me, it's really just about finding function. It's about getting back to what should be your natural approach.
That sounds great. Yeah, interesting conversation.
Yeah, it was. I was pleasantly surprised with the book and with Tony. Because knowing some of his friends, I was expecting a totally different book from the Be More Human aspect of that. But it was a great book. And if you're concerned about mobility, flexibility, strength, all those functional fitness things that we talk about right now, this is one of the best books you can buy to become more functionally fit.
That sounds great.
All right. Well, Rachel, I'll talk to you next week.
Great. Thanks. Take care.
Okay. You too. Bye.
Thanks.
Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we're going to learn about our lymphatic system by meeting with Dr. Loretta Friedman and discussing her book, Lymph Link. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.